Welcome to a Creative Approach podcast. I'm your host, Karen Poirier-Brody. Wow, it's been a hectic few weeks. A couple of weeks ago, I was in Montreal for my medical school reunion. And the autumn colors are just magnificent. If you have never been to the northeastern part of the populated North American continent in the autumn, you have missed something beautiful. Put that trip on your bucket list. Now, the food in Montreal was great. I mean, it is great. My niece directed me to Garde Manger the first night that I was there. I was chatting with her on Facebook, and she insisted I go, as she and my nephew are great fans of the owner chef, Chuck Hughes. I guess he's a Canadian Food Network celebrity. I often follow my niece's advice, and she has good taste in food. And I went and had the Newfoundland cod, which was a delicious fish. Now, Newfoundland cod was once very abundant in those Grand Banks you may have learned about in grade school. But it was overfish, and it was impossible to find a victim to this overfishing. But this year, it was available for a 6-week season, and my timing was perfect to be there in the middle of that. And I had the good luck of following my family's dining recommendation, and that item was on the menu. Now, all my courses at Garde Manger, including my pre-dinner cocktail, were delicious. Now, that wasn't the only great place to eat in Montreal, of course. And if it didn't get so ridiculously cold and snowy, I could find myself moving back to Montreal for the bread alone. Of course, seeing old haunts and seeing dear old friends was just fantastic. But today, the podcast is on a different journey. This journey involves fantasy and time travel. I'm delighted to bring you a conversation with Ginger Wiseman. Ginger is one of the co-hosts with her sister, Summer Reynolds, of the Outlander Podcast. She has a great story of how her love of the books and then the series and a passion for Scotland led the two of them to create a podcast for Outlander fans. This isn't her only podcast, and we'll explore more of that in our discussion. I always have a great deal of fun learning about how my guests found their creative niche. Today is no exception. Join me now in my conversation with the very enthusiastic Ginger Wiseman to learn more about her passion for all things Outlander and podcasting and her creative approach. Welcome to a Creative Approach podcast and my guest, Ginger Wiseman. Hi, Ginger.
Hi there.
Welcome to the show. And Ginger is a creator of 2 podcasts and co-host with her sister, and we'll learn more about that, of the Outlander Podcast and the All Souls Podcast. Got that right?
Yep.
Okay. Well, it's exciting to have you here. And I was hoping that you could maybe tell us a little bit about this area of creativity today. So, I started my podcast, kind of my little story of being interested in scrapbooking and being a co-host and liking the interviewing of creative people. And that's how I got going. But you have a fan podcast, at least the Outlander Podcast. And I wanted to get your story of what you're doing and what got you there. So if you could tell us maybe a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, you mentioned Summer, my sister. She's and co-host. Summer has, this is going to sound really funny, but we all have books we like, things we like, some of the stuff that we will recommend to others. Well, I can say flat out that whatever Summer has recommended to me over the years, every single book, whether I take her up on it right away or not, she has had a home run with each one to me, as far as, oh, you should look into this. I think you'd like this book. Every single one she has recommended to me, I have loved. So with that as kind of a background, because that is a similar thread to both podcasts, Summer introduced me to the Outlander series in the 90s. She read it in 97, and I think she tried to get me to read it, and I never say, no, forget it. I'm just like, okay, that sounds great. And when I get to it, I get to it. In the 97, I was still in undergrad. 99, I was finishing my undergrad. Actually, I was overseas. German is my second language. I have a bachelor's of German, a master's of teaching German, and I finished my German degree over at a German university in Flensburg. So, and when I was an exchange student, I went to Germany. I lived and worked and studied and traveled all over Europe. So I love the language, I love the people, I love the culture. And so one of the things I try and do whenever I travel, especially to a German-speaking country, is to get loads of books. Because if you try and get them here, number one, the quantity or the selection is going to be really, really, really minimal. And number two, if they do have something you want, it's going to be like, $20, $30 for a paperback. It's not cheap. So whenever I go to a German-speaking country, especially, I get like 7 to 10 huge books, and I don't even care what they are almost. I just get them. I want them to be huge and fat. And it used to be that I would just grab the books. And then I kind of learned a little bit later on, be a little more picky. So I would rather, especially since I do speak English as a mother tongue, I would rather read books, German books, fiction, whatever they are, that are where the original language of the book is German. I would rather not read a translation if the original language of the book is something I speak. So English, French, or German, I would like to read original books, original manuscripts.
Got that, yeah.
So one of these books that I had gotten was called Feuer und Stein, which just means fire and stone. It meant nothing to me, but it was one of those like big collections I just brought home. So Summer was telling me in 97, you need to read this, you need to read this. And I thought, okay, when I get to it. At some point, she saw, probably a year or two later, that we realized later that I actually had the first book of the series on my bookshelf I think I must have gotten it like in 96, but it was in German. Feuer und Stein is the first book of the Outlander series, but translated into German. And so I thought, oh, well, I'm glad I didn't read it because, again, I had this thing about wanting to read in the original language. So when I finally got around to reading Outlander, it was in 1999 after I had gotten back from, oddly enough, a semester abroad in Germany. And I started reading it and I was like, why didn't you tell me this is so good? I can't believe I would like take the book. I was a student assistant. I would take the book to work. I would, do my job that on the side. We had a decent amount of downtime because I'm a pretty quick worker and do a decent job. So I would kind of read on the side until I got my next assignment. And oh my goodness, like I was like very quietly like bawling at work, like I can't stand it. This is so good. So I would tell Summer, why didn't you tell me about it? She's like, Ginger, look, I told you.
I told you.
I told you. See what I'm saying? Seriously, any book she's told me that I should read, I end up falling head over heels with. Okay, so I started reading it. And so long story short, we have both been fans since the 90s. Okay. And the series was begun in 91. We didn't come to it till a little bit later. But because of the popularity and because of the story, it has been optioned several times, whether as movie or as TV show, whatever. And the author, Diana Gabaldon, is very open about this. She'll put on her blog, she shares with fans. She's just like, look, it's been optioned again. We'll see where it goes. Because once it's optioned, it's out of her hands.
Right.
Well, in June of 2013, so about 5 years ago, there was yet another kind of announcement about, not an option, because the option actually was earlier, but it was about the show Outlander being made to a TV adaptation. And two names were linked with it that made us really take this seriously. And that is the name of the network, Stars, and the name of the executive producer, Ron D. Moore. Now, if you know about Ron D. Moore, he's been connected with Star Trek, Next Generation, and also with the reboot of Battlestar Galactica. So he has very, very strong and legit sci-fi cred. And even though I would never look at Outlander and say, oh, it's a sci-fi novel, well, it's definitely fantasy and there's time travel, so I could see it.
Sure.
And so that was June. Well, in July, that started, getting us all excited as fans. And so I started looking around and, predominantly I had been a fan like on my own with my sister, maybe on a few message boards, but no kind of fangirl thing. And then I saw them like, this is amazing. This could be really, really, really good. I really want to be a part of this fandom, but not in a way that others have done before. Meaning I don't want to do another blog. I don't want to do a video blog. I don't want to do a message board because these things existed and they have been done well. I did not want to do something someone else had already done. So I had been a listener and fan of podcasts since about 2008. And that made me think, I wonder if there's a show. So I looked up And there at that point it was called iTunes, of course. I looked up in iTunes and there was nothing. There was no Outlander podcast. And I'm like, okay, that's the answer. I got to do it. So I asked my sister, I said, look, since you're the one who introduced me to this and you know the books just as well, would you do this with me? She's like, sure. I don't know what it is, but let's go. And so that was in July. And then by August, we had our first few episodes up. And that's how Outlander started.
That's how that started. And it sounds like you feed on each other. Like she recommends the books, you plan the adventure of podcasting, and you go along with each other.
It just so happened, yes, because, well, it's going to sound like repetitive in a moment, but yeah, in our lives, she has definitely recommended, Ginger, I think you'd like this book. And that's where I say I have never been steered wrongly, incorrectly. She knows my taste well enough to know that not everything she reads would she recommend to me, but the stuff she recommends to me, she knows I will like. So that's how Outlander started. And a few years into, because we didn't have enough to do, a few years into Outlander, actually a few years before that, Summer had mentioned a series by Deborah Harkness loosely called the All Souls Trilogy, but the first book was called A Discovery of Witches. And I thought, it was like Outlander. Well, I'll read it when I can. And then now that was, I think, before we started the show. So 2 years into Outlander, Summer sees an announcement, sees another press release. It always has to do with the press releases that says that the BBC has been, at least PR-wise, has been connected to a potential television adaptation of the All Souls trilogy. And Summer said, Ginger, this is what I told you to read. Did you ever read it? And I was like, I haven't read it. So, or I hadn't read it at that time, or maybe I had just started it but hadn't finished the trilogy. And so this is in, I think, late 14 or early 2015. So anyway, she sees it, she brings my attention to it, and she says, I want to do this. And I was like, oh gosh. So I finished the last book. Well, the last book had just come out in 2014. So that's why I hadn't read the last book, obviously. But once it was announced, they were working on an adaptation. I said, oh my goodness. And once again, we looked around. There was no other podcast. So we named it and started our journey there. Now, I will say, so we have two shows, but I will say, because Outlander is so much older, and of course the TV show has been around for 4 years now, whereas All Souls Trilogy has changed production teams and everything, they have finished filming season 1, and that will come out in the US early 2019. But because Outlander has been around for so much longer, our show even, and of course there have been 3 seasons of the television show, we've had more time to gain a following, to gain a listenership, and have a good enough listenership, if you will, to have sponsors. Well, as I said earlier, before we started recording, when you have a sponsor, you have a responsibility. And so because Outlander is weekly, and many of those weeks we have sponsors, that show has to come first because we have financial obligations or obligations. So the other one necessarily has kind of fallen behind, not been ignored, but it has not been as prolific, I should say, as Outlander.
And you have other jobs too.
Well, thank God I only have 2 podcasts, but yes, I have a full-time job and about a 1-hour commute each way. Summer also has a full-time job and is a single parent, although our parents are very, very, very supportive and help out in many, many ways. But so it started as a hobby. It's still a hobby. But it's now enabled us, to, oh my goodness, meet so many people, do some travel, and just the kind of people you meet and the experiences you have, you never really know where you might go.
Right. And you have, not just fans of the books and the show, but you have your fans too. So it makes for an interesting experience.
It does. Okay, I guess, not I guess. I know you're right. There are fans of our show. Uh-huh. I think it's always weird. I always feel weird anyway, using those terms. I think it's true, but I think it's always odd to talk about that because Summer and I are fans. That's why we started the show as fans for other fans to get together and kind of, geek out about something that we all love. And so we were at this event last weekend in Philadelphia, and Summer was in line to get tea or something. And she was talking to someone, And someone turned around and said, I recognize your voice.
Of
And
course.
oddly enough, they recognized her voice from even though the event was for All Souls, they
Uh-huh.
recognized her voice from Outlander. So we
So there
have,
are fans of both shows who will
a
probably
lot of
follow
people,
both of your podcasts, right?
although we don't truly cross promote because they are different. Well, there is, well, maybe not. We're finding out that there is a lot of crossover in the fandom. But what we have found is that whether it's in our Facebook group or whether it's online or on our show or on, social media, people have told us, I think 3 separate people told me this. They came up to me last weekend and said this, that they found All Souls, the books, the con, our show, through our Outlander show. And I thought, wow, that's really kind of cool. So it's having even further reach than just Outlander. But yeah, it's really interesting.
And so now, when you're involved in this show, you said something about Comic-Con and other cons. So that's a part of your kind of outreach from your show as well, I assume. So I think of Comic-Con as more, I guess it is a lot of sci-fi in there, not being someone who attends that. So I guess Outlander would be a large part of that.
Yeah, it's so funny. Again, none of this was started with these certain goals in mind. We were just interviewed a few days ago. People were asking us like what were our goals when we started, and I was like, I wish we had goals. We didn't. We just we hoped our parents would listen, maybe. It's so funny.
And you have a lot of listeners. Yeah.
Well, the interesting thing about the 2 fandoms, or I should say even the 2 readerships, is that, again, I think I had heard of Comic-Con. I'd never been, but I think I had heard of Comic-Con. I didn't really know. And I think the only thing I associated it with, to be honest, was people like comic books,
comic
and
superheroes, and
yes,
things like
and
that.
sci-fi, and a lot of cosplay.
Right.
That's what I thought, because that's what the news shows, right?
Right.
So I didn't know about it. I didn't know really truly what it was or what it could be. And so the funny thing is, not only were the 2 shows just like all the stuff we've done, not only has that not been planned, since day one, it's really interesting because once we started the second show and thought, oh, we're just going to talk about books we like and maybe get some interviews, whatever. Well, the funny thing is that while Outlander has been at Comic-Con through Stars, I think, so I've been 5 times. I think 3 of the 5 times. They went in 2014 and 15. They skipped 16, went 17, and didn't go this year. I'm not happy that they didn't go. Obviously, I'm always happy to see Outlander stuff. But one of the good things, or a benefit of them not going, is that we could concentrate on all this stuff and work to attend all the panels that were related to the author of the other series that our other show is based on. So Deb Harkness was on 3 different panels this Comic-Con this year, one with other authors, one with just herself, and then one, it was the inaugural, the debut premiere, however you want to put it. It was the first Comic-Con panel, San Diego Comic-Con panel, A Discovery of Witches. And it did have the leads from many of the leads, as well as the producer from the show. And they had their first Comic-Con big panel, and they debuted like in a bigger room than Outlander did in 2014. Outlander was like in a smaller ballroom, and they were in ballroom 20, and the 2 big hitters at Comic-Con are ballroom 20 and hall H. So when we saw that the show that our second show was based on was going to be at Comic-Con, we were like, are you kidding me? And we got there early enough. We got in front row. It was crazy. So
so did you get to meet your
Yeah. So that's another thing. So not only have I gone to Comic-Con the last 5 years, the first year I was just a normal attendee, but the last 4 years we have been fortunate to be press. So we apply through our show as a press entity, I guess. And once you get press, it's good for 2 years, and then you have to reapply. So no, we'll be reapplying this fall or this next year, whenever they open. But because of that, you get not just it gets you into the door, but also you have the opportunity, nothing's guaranteed, to get emails from various outlets. Because again, one of the whole reasons that Comic-Con is done by many networks is to promote the stuff coming up in the fall, right? Their new shows.
Oh, sure.
Well, Outlander isn't coming up until November, so it kind of made sense that they weren't coming because they weren't coming out too soon. But A Discovery of Witches is coming out in the UK, mind you, in September. So it's a UK production that is filmed in the UK and takes place, whereas Outlander is an American production filmed in Scotland and other places, but mostly filmed in Scotland. But it actually takes place in Scotland, the first, I guess, the first two books with a little bit of France. And then now we're about to go into book 4. Book 4 is in the New World. So even though it takes place in colonial America, it's still being filmed in Scotland. And from what we understand, as long as the franchise lasts, it will be filmed in there because they have a really nice studio that was basically refurbished for them. So they have a lot of gains there. But even though we missed Outlander this year at Comic-Con, it was really nice to be able to concentrate on all the All Souls things. Part of it was having a press badge. I was able to get into the press roundtables for Discovery of Witches, where they kind of do round robins. The press stays still, and they have 2 chairs at each table. So they usually do single or double interviews where they'll have whoever is being interviewed kind of do a round robin. They'll have like 10 or 15 minutes at a table, get up, and then go to the next table, and everyone switches. Whereas we sit still and wait for the next ones to come. So that was fun. We got some nice footage from that. And then we were able to also, outside of all of that, interview the author privately at a cafe just before she left. We got a lot of good material from that. And then that was Comic-Con. Now this year, what we just got back from was, and of course, Comic-Con is, other than genre, it is non-production specific, right? So any and all shows that can fit in there. Whereas the event we just got back from in Philadelphia is called All Souls Con.
Oh, so it's just the books.
Exactly. It's just the books and the world, because there's another book coming out, not part of the trilogy. The trilogy is done, but in the same world, based on characters from the same world.
Oh, so the fans are going to love that one too.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, it's really good. It comes out September 18th, and people are going to love it.
Now, the All Souls shows, even though they're produced in the UK, are those available through internet access or through some of the networks?
It's a UK production, filmed in the UK, and it will be available in the UK first. It starts on Sky One and Now TV September 14th, Friday at 9 p.m. in the UK. Now, one of the many good things that was announced at Comic-Con is that we now have had the name of the American distributors, the networks.
Okay.
And that is Sundance Now and Shudder. Now, Sundance Now and Shudder are both owned by AMC. And AMC, I guess the parent network, although some of their Facebook posts did mention January, we don't have an exact date. And January, it may not be January, but we believe it will likely be January. But what they have said and committed to is early 2019. So unfortunately, we American fans are going to have to wait till early 2019. But Outlander Season 4 comes back to the U.S., premieres in the U.S., Sunday, November 4th, correct?
Ah, great. Now, when you're doing your podcast, I mean, you follow both the book by chapter, I assume, and also the shows, right, as they're released? I mean, how do you coordinate that so it doesn't get too confusing?
I wish I had a really good answer. So kind of by the seat of our pants. So I don't know about All Souls yet, because it came along after Outlander for us, and because of how time-consuming Outlander is because of the sponsors and the weekly and everything. We haven't been able to, or maybe refuse to really, set a real schedule. I would love to get out 2 episodes a month of the other one. The problem is, on top of 2 might be a bit much, but at the minimum, we'd love to do 1. Well, we are not quite halfway through the first All Souls book, but if we double up, we should be fine by January. So what happened with Outlander is, when we started in August of 2013, we thought, because we didn't know at that point exactly how long it was going to be until the show came out. Well, within a week or 2, we learned that, they still haven't cast the second character, the main the main character. So we're like, okay, this is going to be a little bit. And so we thought, we didn't know it would be a year. We thought maybe like 6 months or whatever. But we thought, let's plan for the long haul. After an episode or 2 of us saying, hi, introduce us, right? It gets a little old. So we thought, we need to find content. We don't know what to do. So we thought, well, we've got a book. We've got a really good sized book that is there. And that's the whole gist of what we're talking about, right? It's what brought us together and hopefully brings other fans in. So our idea was, let's do a read along. Now, some people think that we sit there and read, and no, that would be a copyright issue. And the audiobooks are created and owned by Recorded Books and other entities. So no, we don't perform the books. We read off mic. We read on our own time and take notes, look up symbolism, whatever. And then we come on and we discuss the chapter. So the first whole year we were like, okay, let's just do chapter by chapter. We were approximately every week. And then I think by the end of 2013, very strongly, pretty much every week. But we had no sponsors. So we really, we could do whatever we wanted. At some point by the next spring or summer, although we didn't have a date, I think we had a month. Like it was something somehow told to us like we would be getting our show by like August or September. And so what I did was I looked at how many chapters we had left and kind of spread them out and said, okay, that should, it should definitely get us there. And then we had the odd interview, and then I went to Comic-Con that first year, and so things start to fill up, and you start to feel, oh, are we going to have time to finish the book? Well, the first one was definitely by the seat of our pants. Once the first one finished, and we thought, oh, well, actually, the first one is an anomaly because they did 8 episodes, took a 6-month break, and did the next 8, which is really odd. But other than that, it's been almost a year or so in between seasons. So the good thing about that is that the books only get longer, which is good and not so good. But after our experience in the first season, we quickly decided, okay, this is going to be our format. We're going to talk about the books and finish the book by the time the series starts. And then once the series is on, we talk about the show. Literally, the week after the show ends, we literally start chapter 1 of the next book. So we're never at a lack of material, which is good and a little bit of pressure, I'm not going to lie. This weekend, I'll put up chapter 42 discussion of Drums of Autumn, which is book 4. As I said, season 4 starts early November. And so we've got about just over 2 months to finish. I think there are 71 or 2 or 3 chapters in this book.
That's a lot.
It is a lot. And sometimes if they're shorter chapters, like we literally look at how many pages. And if it's under like 10, we combine.
Sure.
So yeah. And you know what? If something happens and let's say, God forbid, they move the date. Look, we survive. We make sure that if we have to work our butts off and get something out, even if it's a heck of a lot of stuff and have to get out a few episodes a week, we'll do whatever we have to do because the book will be done by the time the show starts.
And this brought up a couple of questions for me. One, of course, is when you're reviewing the show, when does that come out in relationship to the show?
Haha, good question. So the show used to be Saturday night. They changed it to Sunday. Our shows go up, or I should say we're allowed to publish right after the Eastern premiere of the show, of the East Coast. So the show comes out 9 p.m. Eastern, which is 6 p.m. Pacific. So by 7 p.m. Pacific, we are allowed to publish. And the only way you can do that and be ready is if you have seen it already.
Right, of course.
So we've been very fortunate, at least thus far. We'll see what happens this fall. We've been very fortunate to be able to get screeners. And so we get them around Wednesday or Thursday and watch and take notes and then record. And then I edit and get everything ready and then either schedule it, which is very unusual. I'm usually home anyway, but I would rather do it by hand and not. The problem is if there's any kind of mistake that I make on the time zone or anything like that, and a show goes up too early, the content is embargoed, right, until after the East Coast airing. So I feel much safer if it's just me hitting publish. And then the other thing is that we just started last year, which is, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of work. It's actually the least amount of work, but it's just like, oh, one more thing. So one of the things that I noticed early on, although we didn't do anything about it, was that there would be like the odd podcast or the odd show or people on Twitter saying, join us for our after show. And I thought, oh, what a great idea. There's like an after show. Well, the after show, understandably was after the show, but not even the same day. The show came on Saturday and they'd have an after show like Monday. And I'd be like, well, okay, that's great. But I know as a fan, I want to talk about the stuff that goes down in that episode, like right when it ends, because people are really happy, are really upset, are really passionate. They want to talk about it right then. Now, yes, people go to Twitter, people talk, things that have been available that will stick around. People are still going to do that. But in 2016, we started our Facebook community and it's grown and it's a nice, safe, no drama place and we like it. And so we started asking people, I think before season 3 started, would you guys be interested in joining us for a live after show? And they said, absolutely. I'm like, well, okay, we can try it. And so even when we were out of town, even when we were in New Orleans last year for 1 week for speaking of All Souls, we went to All Souls in September last year, right in the middle of Outlander. So the show ends at 7. And so at about 7:15 to 8:15 Pacific, we do, to the best of my knowledge, it is the only live after show right after the show ends. So we do it via video. So basically a Facebook Live in our group. So I do it. I bring Summer in and we do the split screen and people join us and tell us how happy they are, how pissed off they are, what they liked, what they didn't like. And then our show goes up like right after that.
So what are the sorts of things people like? They get upset when it doesn't follow the book, or they...
Oh, that's a big one. Yeah, that's a big one. There's a lot, but I thought, okay, well, we did it. We committed to it. We can, we'll do it. Well, and so I kind of thought, I wonder if we're going to do it again. And people are asking us already, are you going to do your live after show? And I was like, oh gosh, what I would love to do is do it like on Facebook, unfortunately, and I'll try it because if we can get it to work, I'm happy to. But unfortunately, unless you're like a verified account on your page, like a Facebook page, or you can do a Facebook Live. Anyone can do that. But to do the split screen, at least last time we tried it, so last fall when we were doing this for Outlander, we had to do it in our group because you can do a split screen using a personal account, but you couldn't do it using a page unless you were like verified, like Oprah or something. But it was important to us to do it rather than do it 100% publicly. We're happy to do it publicly, but we couldn't get the split screen. And even though we live in the same city, there was no way every single Sunday for 13 weeks that we were going to be able to be in the same place. So,
okay. Another question that had come up when you were discussing things was that having a sponsor changed some things. And I was wondering just what that meant.
Sure. Okay. So it didn't change our content. We still do either the book or the show. We still talk about the same things. Nothing has changed as far as our prep, except making sure we have the sponsor spot ready. But what it has changed, and again, even before we got sponsors, we were still 95%. We were already weekly. So that didn't even change. The one thing that having a sponsor did change is that, again, unless there's a really good reason, and if there is a really good reason, you really should hopefully point it out beforehand and not wait till the day after it's due. At least our sponsors, with the way they work, is they buy a spot on a show during a certain week, during a calendar week. Now, their week starts on Monday. So they buy, our media host tells us, oh, okay, this sponsor bought a spot on your show this week. Say it's this coming week, starting the 20th is Monday. So the 20th or the 27th, I believe. So, or 26, whatever it is. So basically, you can put up a show any of the days. You do have that latitude. The problem is our show has been Sunday, I don't even know, for 4 years now, 5 years now. So that's what works for us. And that's not a problem. They don't care. But since the calendar week ends on Sunday, if your show goes up on Sunday and the sponsor calendar ends on Sunday, you literally have one shot. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So for me to do our show any other day of the week, a Saturday might work once in a while, but for me to do it during the week, it's too much.
It's impossible. Yeah.
Not impossible. I've done it, but it puts a real crimp in my style. Like, it's a lot.
Well, that means it is impossible.
Yeah. It's definitely not sustainable. I'll put it that way.
Okay. Good.
So yeah, so our content never changed, and it wasn't like extra pressure to make a certain type of show. It was just like, okay, probably the one thing that changed, even though again, it was not very common at all, is if I were out or slept in or something happened, I'm like, okay, for me, just for us, I want to get our show up before the work week starts, right? So I can get it up Sunday at 2:00, Sunday at 10:00, who cares? Well, now it has to be up before Sunday midnight. Or it doesn't count. No, that's not really a problem because I don't stay up till 2:00 a lot on a work night. So, but yeah, it's a little more accountability. Yeah.
Yeah, that tightens up your schedule a lot.
Just a little, because like I said, we were already on Sundays.
Well, I guess one of the things, I mean, you said you listen to podcasts a lot, but had you done any kind of broadcasting? How did you feel? Here we've talked about just the workings of the show and everything, but how did you feel like podcasting was something you could do and you could do with your sister?
I never thought I could do it with my sister. It was always something that I wanted to do. The reason I included her, which I think she's thankful for, is because I thought if I'm going to do something, first of all, I wasn't sure I would do it on my own, at least to start with. But if I was going to do something that was attached to something like Outlander, then, she was the one who introduced me to it. And I knew she loved the books, and I knew that she knew the books. It's never fun to have a conversation by yourself.
No.
Well, I mean, when you're starting out, you don't have an audience. So I thought it was so important to have at least another voice there, whether it was every episode, most episodes, whatever. So when I first found podcasting in 2008, I never thought about a podcast by myself or a podcast with my sister. That was not even on any kind of plan. Even back then, you could type in whatever on your search bar, and it seemed at least that there were so many shows. And I was like, oh my gosh. And some of the people I listened to, it was a very high production value. Some was not a very good production value. Some had like echo mics that but I stayed for the content. I didn't stay for necessarily the sound quality. What I didn't know is that I was learning for those 5 years, right? I was absorbing what they sound like, what the formats were like. And I think actually, quite honestly, I don't know that I even listened to really, really well-produced shows. Like I didn't listen to anything from NPR. I didn't listen, even if it was just repackaging it as a podcast. I didn't listen to anything that was
commercial.
Yeah, I don't think, if I did, I don't remember. So I listened to a lot of just so many different things that were like a lot of homegrown, homemade stuff. And that kind of got me thinking like, this is so neat. I love being able to, if you choose to be somewhat or mostly anonymous, you could use a pseudonym. Yeah, it was basically sky's the limit at that point. And so I had a thought maybe a few years into it. This is something I think I'd like to do. I don't know what I want to talk about. I don't know what I want to do with it. But someday, in some way, I think I'd like to have my own show. But I just don't know what it looked like.
Oh, and then you became a fan of Outlander.
Well, I was a fan of Outlander in the 90s. I found podcasting in 2008. So Outlander definitely came first. But to go back even further, both my sister and I have been performing since we were children. And we grew up going to performing arts schools and or summer schools and just different things, and always being in choirs, always being in drama and musicals and theater and wherever we could. And I actually went to received a scholarship, a full vocal scholarship to university. So I was a classical voice major, and on the side double majored in German. So I used that. I got 2 degrees for the price of 1. And my sister went to AMDA, which is in New York City. She went to musical theater school. So we have a background in performing. We've both done local theater and just different things. But it never really was a goal to kind of mesh that in any way. At least it wasn't a visible on purpose goal. So it comes back around in an odd way, even though I didn't intend it for that way.
Yeah, that wasn't a career path that you had set out for yourself.
Exactly. But it kind of turned out that now we're doing not only one show, but 2 shows together. And in a way, I think it kind of hits the spot. It is not the same as performing. It is not. It doesn't hit it 100%. But it does definitely fall into that category. Even though we're not performing per se, we're being honest and open and talking about why we like or how we like certain things. But I think the whole packaging of it, right? The discussion is just 2 fans, truly. But then the editing, the sculpting, the prepping, the publishing, and the promoting. So once you add all of those layers, it changes it a little bit. And then, of course, when you're putting a show out, and you're the face or one of the faces of a show, it does kind of change it. I never set out to do it for that reason, but it definitely, in a positive way, scratches that itch a very small amount, but it definitely does a little bit.
Right. And out of this show, so you've gotten a couple of podcasts, you've been able to do, really involve yourself in the stories and have that happen. But you had mentioned that you, of course, have been in Scotland, and I understand that out of your podcast, you had a wonderful time this year with a adventure to Scotland.
Yeah, that's another thing that we never would have ever would have thought of. Not only not even thought of, like probably would have said, go away. because it's a big deal. And I don't just mean like, oh, our trip's a big deal. I mean, it's a big deal to plan something like that and to take on that responsibility.
Right, because you took along a bunch of fans.
Yeah. So Summer and I went. I completed a postgraduate degree. I lived and studied in Scotland for a year in the early 2000s. Summer had been there in the like mid to late 2000s as a tourist, as I had kind of gone, but I was a student. So I was a little bit different than a tourist. But I had been back several times. I dated a Scot for 4 years. So I was back there at least once a year for a bit. So Scotland truly, aside from Outlander, Scotland is truly it's my favorite place on earth.
It's beautiful. I've been there and it's a lovely spot.
It's beautiful. The people, the weather, the surroundings, absolutely everything. So Summer and I went together for the first time in 2015. She had only been once before. So we called it just for fun. I'm like, okay, I think she came up with it, but I said, let's come up with a hashtag so that whenever we post, we can use this hashtag. And even if it's just for us, other people can follow it, or we can go back and find all of our stuff. She came up with Pod Abroad. And I thought, oh, that's really cute. So it rhymed, and it was short. It was good. So we did it, and we had a great time. We met a friend of ours there, another American friend who was also another fan of Outlander, someone whom we met through the fandom. So her name is Mandy. She's just an amazing person, a really good friend. And we met her over there. She had been over there for a little bit. Oh man, she's got cojones of steel. She basically rented a car and drove us around everywhere. And we saw many filming sites. We saw some other historical sites, and we stayed at another person's flat. And the person in whose home we stayed, and we actually got a quick chance to see her like on the streets of Glasgow because she was working, was Susan Brown, Blue Badge tour guide. So we were staying with a tour guide, staying at a mutual friend's home with someone who we had met through the fandom, and then, of course, Summer and I. And we were going all around using this hashtag, and like, this is amazing. And so people were asking us all these questions, and they may have even asked us before we went in 2015, but not since we started the show, but maybe since 2014, but definitely since 2015, people have asked us, completely unrelated to each other, hey, have you guys thought about taking some people to Scotland? And I was like, no, not going to happen. But over from 2015 to 2016, we got enough questions about that. Hey, have you thought about this? Have you thought about organizing this? And I was like, I'm very honored that you would ask that, but that's just not something that we can do. And then our parents asked us this, and I was like, okay, this is a bit much now. So I'm like, okay, we need to at least investigate this. If we wanted to do this, what's the first step? And so that woman we had met, Susan Brown, is, as I said, a Blue Badge Scottish tour guide. So we said, okay, Susan, what would be the way to go about doing this? So really the only qualifier that I absolutely said, this is the one thing I insist on, is that we do not handle any money. I don't want anyone to pay us. People have to pay, but they will not pay us. So however we work this out, it has to have someone who can handle the money. So Susan built an itinerary, and it was a luxury tour. So it was like a 4-star. It was beautiful. Just looking at these places going, oh my gosh, it's so beautiful. And it included historical locations. It included filming locations, and it was amazing. And then we put it out for bid, found a tour operator, and lo and behold, the tour operator handles all the money. So we didn't have to handle any of the money. That was the only thing that I really insisted on. And so then we came up with a plan on how to start promoting it, and we announced it May 1st of last year, and we sold out in less than 4 months.
Wow.
Anyway, so it ended up being, we took a luxury tour of 26 people to, I would say to Scotland. Everyone got there on their own, and that was not part of the tour, right? The tour is, once you land, that's the tour. Like everything that you pay for is included once you land. But yeah, it was amazing. And as soon as we got back, we came up with our next itinerary and announced it early mid-July and are just about 40% booked. So
oh, wow.
Yeah.
So that's something that people can look forward to if they're Outlander fans, of looking up that. Well, maybe this is a good point for us to take time to say where people can find you, websites, Facebook, whatever. So what will people have to look for?
So the easiest way is to go to our website, and you should be able to get to all the social platforms from there. And that is outlanderpod, outlanderpod.com. But if you're on Facebook or on Twitter or on Instagram or on Tumblr, we are the same name. So @ Outlander Pod, all one word. And you can find us in all those places there. And if you are curious about our trip to Scotland and just want to find out the itinerary and whatever, we have a unique URL for that. You could just go to podabroad.com.
Oh, great. Well, that's wonderful news for people. Now, I've loved hearing the story of how this evolved and how you created these shows, and it's very interesting. But I was wondering, normally we end the show with just our guests' general thoughts about creativity, and I wonder if you had a few things you wanted to share with the listener.
Sure. I will say that, well, I think every individual has their own talents or their own unique ways, their own unique things that they can bring to the world, and that they maybe gifts they have or abilities that they've honed. Whatever it is that you feel, even if you're not doing it professionally, whatever it is that you feel is a great outlet for you creatively. I will say that it is something that has to be, and I've learned this. I won't say the hard way, but I've learned it and I'm working on it. Being creative must be intentional. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't be creative without being intentional, but I think especially those of us who have full-time day jobs or commutes or things, let alone, families that we're raising, it's important if you are a creative, and I believe everyone can be, but if you are a creative or if you're musical, if you're artistic, whatever it may be, that if that's not your profession, as it's not mine, I am learning that I have to make time for those things. For me, that's mostly music and singing, because I don't do that as much right now. So that's probably something that I have learned a lot over the last 5 years.
Is being intentional.
If your livelihood does not revolve around creativity, if it's not your main day-to-day job, then yes, you have to be intentional. You have to carve out time and schedule for it to make sure that you have that.
Because it's a very important part of life.
Absolutely. I think it's needed. I think it's not only good so that you actively think, oh, now I get to go do this, but also, it's like so much happens in our brains to our bodies, but mostly our brains when we sleep, and we don't know the half of it. Well, when you do, when you are creative, when you are fulfilling that, I believe you are also helping your brain, helping your body, calming yourself, resetting hormones. I mean, there are so many things we don't know, and by tapping into something that we love and that calms us, I think is only healthy.
Well, I think those are wonderful thoughts. And I just thank you so much for being a guest on the show today. I've enjoyed this a lot.
Well, thank you so much. It's been fun to chat.
Thank you for listening to the podcast today. I hope you had as much fun as I did in learning more about Ginger and her creative life. I'm ready for the cold weather to snuggle down with a binge intake of Outlander and her podcast. Links to Ginger and the Outlander Podcast are available in the show notes at www.acreativeapproachpodcast.com. Now, when you use Facebook, please visit and join our Creative Approach Podcast page. Your questions and feedback on the show are welcome on our Facebook group page. So do join there too. We love feedback, and audio feedback can be sent on the podcast website. While there, I hope you'll sign up for the email list. Now that I'm back, I plan on a newsletter soon. Just a reminder to become a subscriber to a Creative Approach podcast on your favorite podcast platform if you've not done so already. The podcast is available on most, including Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. If you'd like to support the show with even $1 a month, your generosity would be most welcome. You can do that by going to the Patreon tab on the website. Please join me at a Creative Approach podcast in future conversations where I hope you will find inspiration to make things, tell your story, and explore a creative approach to life.